Why are compliance certificates such a crucial part of the property transfer process?
And many times in our OTP, there's a Voetstoots clause that kind of is an overall term that hides quite a lot of things and can be problematic. When you have compliance certificates in place, it's actually there for the protection from both the sellers and the purchasers, and also it gives banks and institutions that have an interest in the property, it gives them the safety for their investment. We often get after registration issues that goes back to the compliance. And if you've done your homework, you've got a reputable contractor, we don't even have to call you about the issue.
And I think people don't realize, I didn't think after living in the property for 8 years, we had solar installed, say 3-4 years ago, that now we'd have to spend money when we've just sold our property to make it compliant. Arlene, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about this episode, and I just wanted to, before we jump and dive into the questions, and just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit more about your background, where you're from, what company you're representing today.
Thank you very much, Mia. It's a privilege for us also to be part of your project. So I'm Arlene Giffin Bassoon from ESI Attorneys. I have been a conveyancer for about 22 years now, and I started off my journey in Pretoria, and I've been in the Western Cape for the last 5 years with ESI Attorneys, who only specializes in property and estates. So we are passionate about our property and our day-to-day dealings with property.
That's wonderful. And 20 years, you must have experienced quite a lot of interesting, things in that time in the industry.
We did. It's never a dull moment in the property sector and in a attorney's office as well. We get to do a lot of complaints, a lot of joys of people purchasing property from the beginning. We do the resales, and we also work with investors.
And you guys predominantly focus on the conveyancing side of...
Yes. So I am the transferring manager at ESI Attorneys. So we are in the full spectrum of property transfers.
Wonderful. And I do think it is, and I've said it in previous episodes, people often forget that we deal with, it's such an emotional transaction. I think especially if you are buying or selling for the first time, there's so much emotion that goes, into the transaction. I think like us as estate agents, working together with you guys, doing the conveyancing of the property, we are really there to hold, the client's hand through the whole process.
Yeah, and that's very important. Sometimes we deal with some terminology and some ideas which comes natural to us, but it doesn't necessarily come natural to the first-time home buyer. And also we can't treat all our clients the same, as the investor's needs are much different than a first-time home buyer. We have to explain, and you've got to be patient and go through the whole process, every process and every term you need to explain.
And I think that is exactly why we have you here today. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what we know as COCs, and I think the everyday person out there has no idea what that means. But I really wanted to touch today on the compliance certificates and why they are so important. So I'm going to jump right in, and we're really starting with the basics. So I wanted to ask you, why are compliance certificates such a crucial part of the property transfer process when you sell and buy a property?
Okay, so when you buy a property, you don't know everything about this property. And many times in our OTP, there's a Voetstoots clause that kind of is an overall term that hides quite a lot of things and can be problematic. So when you have compliance certificates in place, it's actually there for the protection from both the sellers and the purchasers. And also it gives banks and institutions that have an interest in the property, it gives them the safety for their investment.
And who would be responsible? Who would be the responsible party for bringing this to the transaction?
Okay, so generally speaking, it is on the seller to supply the compliance certificates. But if the contract doesn't say that, it will obviously be the seller. But you can sometimes contract that the purchaser can be responsible for it as well. Some certificates you can contract not to issue, but that is a very, very dangerous business, as it will catch up with you. Many times after registration, it becomes an issue, and to accept that it's there for the safety of both parties is a win for everybody.
So that's going to bring me to our next question that we're going to be discussing, and that is the electrical certificate of compliance. So we all know this is a legal requirement. We also recently sold our property in Durban, and this was actually one of the certificates that was required. So maybe just walk us a little bit through the process of what does an inspection look like for this specific certificate, and why is there a 2-year validity period on the certificate?
Okay, Mia. Yes. So on compliance certificates, we can tell a lot of stories, especially with the electrical compliance certificates, as if you do not get it issued by the correct person or a registered person, it can bring a lot of problems afterwards. So the requirement is that you get an electrical compliance certificate, which is not older than 2 years. So when you are looking for an electrician, we would suggest that you go onto the website of the Board of Electricians, and there you will find many electricians that are accredited, and they will then provide the necessary documentation. So the compliance certificate is there for the protection of both the seller and the purchaser. As you can imagine, electricity is a very dangerous subject. And if there's something goes wrong, it might be that the insurers might not pay out the insurance claim. So when banks issue loans to the purchasers, they have to protect their interest as well, because they are investing a lot of money into this transaction. And for the insurance claims and for the bank's protection, it is very important to utilize a registered electrician so that the claims will be successful.
So typically the process would be, I have put my house on the market, I've now sold. Your role in the conveyancing department would be to remind, I guess, the seller to get the certificate of compliance for the electricity. So just from our own experience, the electrician would then come and actually do a walk through your property and look and make sure through all the electrical compliance side to see if everything is 100% above board. Now, there's been a lot of solar systems that's been installed in properties. How has that affected this particular certificate or the process of issuing that?
Okay, so when your solar system is connected to the electrical system, or then it will have a separate little section where they will issue an electrical compliance certificate. So your main electrical compliance certificate will make reference to the solar system that you are using, and then they will issue a separate certificate for that.
Okay.
Just also, which is interesting, is to know that the appliances themselves are not covered by the electrical compliance certificates. For instance, a stove. Many times you have a buyer afterwards complaining and saying, listen, you issued or you used a compliance certificate for this registration, but my stove is not working. So that does not entail the appliance itself as well. So you will get a certificate that regulates the supply to the appliance, but not the appliance itself.
That's really interesting. So just for our listeners and our audience, I think that's so valuable, because as a property practitioner or an estate agent, I think that's also important to mention when you go through these, points or steps in the transaction with your buyer, and or your seller in that instance. Because when we just sold our property recently, we actually sold the house with the stove, and I honestly didn't even think, that didn't cross my mind. So it's really good to have reference back to that. So thank you so much for that reminder. So now we want to talk about gas and water installation certificates. So what are some of the common issues that you would say? I mean, I'm sure you see them often in your day-to-day, workings with these transactions. What are some of these challenges that can arise when it comes to the inspections, and what can sellers do to better prepare for it when they do happen?
Okay, so gas certificates are very important when you are making use of any gas appliances. So the main objective is to have it safely installed, and also to make sure that it's compliant with all the SANS prescriptions. So you will get a contractor to come and inspect your gas installation, and it is valid for 6 months, but it has to be issued with every single transfer. So that is also, once again, for insurance purposes and for the banks. And what is interesting, sometimes your OTP does not refer to it as a condition, or the people may waive it. But as soon as a bank is part of the transaction, if you're taking out a bond, or if there's a bond that you're applying for, it is part of the attorney's conduct to get a gas certificate for a transfer, even though it's not specified in the OTP.
And in your 20 years of experience, has there been any, situations where things have gone wrong with clients trying to attain, or, this particular certificate?
Yes. So funny story is, we did a transfer quite recently, and when the gas inspector went out to the property to issue the gas appliances, the gas bottle was removed. And that apparently, he thought that he can remove it, but it's part of the contract. It needs to stay.
A fixture and
fitting. And they had to
Yeah.
reschedule the gas certificate inspection to provide a gas bottle to have it inspected. So please, people,
don't remove your gas bottles. So in that instance where they removed the gas bottle, what did you guys do to assist this client? Because I'm sure that was quite an interesting dilemma.
So we had to make contact with the seller, and we had to request him to please bring back the bottle so that we could have the inspection done. And funnily enough, he promised it to some or other family member, and he had to purchase a new bottle for this inspection purpose.
So bottom line, do not remove the gas bottle.
Please do not.
And it is also important, I think, for us to reiterate to our listeners and the audience that it is a fixture and a fitting. Yes. So when you do purchase a property, anything that is fixed and fitted forms part of the sale of the property.
Yes. Yes.
Great. So also in our country, in South Africa, we've obviously got electrical fences that are pretty common. So what specific safety standards needs to be met when it comes to those electrical fence certificates, which is also part of your compliance certificates?
Yes. So when electrical fence is apparent on a property, you have to get a separate electrical compliance certificate for the fence apart from your normal electrical compliance certificate. And when they issue the certificate, they will go out and look at the installation, at the safety, fire risk, and just to get back to the installation, it's interesting to know that it has to be 1.8 meters above floor level, natural floor level, and it may not be higher than 2.1 meters. So there's a lot of specifics that you and I don't, as consumers, do not know about. But when they go out, they look at all these specific SANS regulations that they need to adhere to.
And I think a lot of people, if you are buying or selling for the first time, often think that your electrical compliance certificate includes your electric fence, and it's not.
That is a very often the clients think.
And who would be qualified to issue the electrical fence compliance certificate? Because that's now not an electrician.
No, it's an electrician by nature, but they have a special certificate or a qualification to be able to issue a fence certificate.
Okay. And then normally in these transactions, if you're a first-time seller and it's the seller's responsibility to get all these COCs, as we call them. I know the agent plays a big role, but do you often get people that just really don't know where to start, and how does your firm assist those clients to through this process, because it's a lot if you're doing it for the first time.
It is overwhelming when you're a first-time buyer, and what we find often is the problem is the funds, so cash flow to pay it up front. So in practice, what happens is you can appoint a contractor, and most of them, 99% of them, are willing to wait during the process for registration to be completed, and on the day when the funds are released to the seller, we will then pay out the money after we've given them our undertaking. So that just makes it practically much more feasible for the seller to give and adhere to the
I guess, and then it also doesn't hold up the transfer. So we talk about what we would call bridging finance or an advance, or using some of the proceeds of the sale to cover these things. And we're actually going to have an episode in the next couple of weeks where we talk to one of those bridging finance companies. And I know that's often what clients actually utilize to make sure that it gets paid and these certificates can be issued, because that can then hold up your transfer at the deeds office specifically.
Yeah. Just some practical experience that we have is when they issue the certificate, you will have a call-out fee for the electrician or the contractor, and that is normally not much. It's in the vicinity of 750 Rand to 1,200 Rand. But when they find anything that needs to be rectified, that is when the problem comes in with funding. So it might be we had recently a transaction where the electrical wiring had to be redone, and it was close to 83,000 Rand, and that becomes a problem. So in that instance, even though the contractors will be willing to wait for their funds or after registration, they have some expenses for the material and labor. And what we find then bridging finance comes in, where a deposit needs to be put down and the balance they will then wait for when we register. We always try to accommodate the clients by not immediately using bridging finance, because obviously there will be interest. So I must say, out of experience, about 99% of the contractors are more than willing to wait until we register.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
I mean, we had an incident because we had solar installed after we built our property, and we had to do quite a bit of work on the electrical system because the regulations changed.
Yes.
And I think people don't realize, I mean, I didn't think after living in the property for 8 years, we had solar installed, say, 3-4 years ago, that now we'd have to spend money when we've just sold our property to make it compliant. So I think that is so important to have somebody like yourselves that work really closely alongside the agent and then your seller and your buyer to advise them on every single one of the steps. So that's great. We've recently relocated to the Cape from Durban. So we call them endemology certificates, but I know in most of the coastal regions, specifically in the Cape area, you guys refer to it as a beetle certificate, and that often catches people by surprise, I think, when you know talking about the beetle certificate. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. Okay. So the beetle certificate is not prescribed by law or by regulations like all the other certificates. It came about by practical experience and in practice of conveyancing. So the main reason is for the banks. They started to look after their interest, and they require a wood borer certificate, or as we call it, a beetle certificate, for registration purposes. So what is interesting is it doesn't cover all insects. It's only wood boring, wood eating organisms.
I see.
That is covered, and it's 3 organisms, not termites, not ants, and one would actually think that would be covered too. So it's interesting. It's only 3 kind of species that are covered, and it is then a valid per transaction. So you can't carry this certificate over to another transaction. It's every time that you sell a property, you have to get it. And it's only valid for 3 to 6 months, which is actually logical.
A short period of time.
Because infestation can happen overnight.
Yeah.
So,
and I can imagine, can you imagine just purchasing your first home and, that process maybe wasn't followed and you do stumble across this, infestation. So I think that's a really good certificate to be part of the transaction.
I can just maybe tell you about an interesting one that we have now. The OTP is old OTP. The agents never changed the clause to adhere to the latest practice. And it only mentions 2 of the species. So we received the certificate, and it made mention of the 3rd. And the purchaser got by to say that it doesn't cover, and the agent had to kick in. So it's very important to make sure you as a purchaser and you as a seller that all the prescribed 3 species are covered, because it might come
That's actually really interesting. I, to be honest, I didn't know that there were those three. So maybe what we can do for our listeners and our audience is we can put in the comment box what those three specific species are that you're referring to.
I can definitely give it to you.
Yeah.
I will send it on to you as
Amazing.
it is. The terminology is,
Yes.
we won't be able to pronounce them.
We
but
won't need
will.
to do that today on the
Yeah.
camera, but yeah, it's
Yes.
good information for people to have.
Yes.
And I think that's amazing. So that's a lot of information for everybody. Thank you so much. When are all these certificates due? At what stage in the transfer process? So I've signed an OTP, it's been accepted, we've instructed the conveyancers yourself. When in that process are all these different certificates due, or what would you suggest?
That is a very good question, and what we would like to is inform the clients to go from the perspective that as sooner as possible is better. Many times we get into lodgement stage and then we can't register due to a compliance certificate that is not submitted. So we will generally follow the OTP. If the OTP says within 7 days after signature of the contract, we will start nudging the purchaser. Generally speaking, when we get the OTP, we will check what the timeframes are. And many OTPs make mention of 7 days or 30 days or whenever after signature of the OTP. But we would like to educate the public and say, please, the sooner the better. We would hate for the transaction to come up for preparation in the deeds office. It comes out of the deeds office due to a formality like issuing of a certificate. And what you must also remember is the contractors have schedules. So many times on 0.99, they wake up and the seller arrange for a certificate to be issued, but then the contractors can't make the time frame.
And that's detrimental, or can be, to the time frame that it takes then for that transaction to go further. We actually advise our clients at the time of signing the OTP, as soon as it's an agreement that is signed by all parties, to start to do that first, because that can be a delay. Yeah. And then I wanted to ask you, have you ever had a situation where a transaction took a very long time to register? Sometimes a late estate, for example, and did you then have to, the seller have to reissue or get the updated certificates because now maybe 3 months have passed? Have you ever had a situation like that?
Yes, we did. And that commonly with estate transfers, and also where people have options for making an offer. So in those instances, we'll advise once the bond is approved or once the finances are settled. So if the purchase price is secured, that's a good time to issue your compliance certificates, because then we normally know registration is imminent.
Yes, and then obviously that would also be the same when you've got a cash buyer that it's an all cash sale. So then that won't take so long. No, that's very, very good information. I think, like I said, it is such a daunting thing to sell your home for the first time, or to be a first time buyer. So I'm really hoping that through this information we can help people, and give them a bit of a head start when they decide to get onto that journey. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us, pertaining to the compliance certificate specifically, that I may have left out today?
Yes, so maybe we should just emphasize to the seller, it seems like an expense, but in the long run, if you do provide a valid certificate, it saves so much time afterwards. We often get after registration issues that goes back to the compliance. And if you've done your homework, you've got a reputable contractor, we don't even have to call you about the issue. We will address it directly with the contractor. If he issued a certificate which is not valid, we will then address it with him. He'll get the opportunity to go out to rectify it. And if he doesn't rectify it, you go to the board where they are registered. And that is the importance, and that is the reason why it has to be prescribed compliance certificates that are issued. It's not just your neighbor next door that's a plumber that can quickly do the work. So it might seem like a big expense, but in the long run, it saves you a lot of trouble, and it's peace of mind for all parties. The purchaser knows what he's buying, and the seller can be at peace. There won't be after registration comebacks.
Yeah, 100%. And also we have a saying from one of our principals, actually, is that buyers can be sellers too. So when you're a buyer, you are going to be a seller eventually. And when you're a seller, you're probably buying somewhere else. So for both parties, you want that to all be, 100% correct. So neither of the two parties should actually, have a problem with that, because it's for both of their benefits.
And that's very true. And if you put yourself in the shoes of the other party, exactly what you're saying. If you buy a property, I would like to be treated with a valid certificate without having to fight to get things done. And if you're the seller, the same.
Absolutely. So, Arlene, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this is so much, really, really a lot of valuable information for our listeners and our audience. So I know that a lot of people are going to ask me where they can get hold of you or your firm. If they have any further questions, where would be the best place for the public to reach ESI Attorneys?
ESI Attorneys, you can email us or you can give us a call. Our email address, or I'm going to give you my email address. It's arlene@esilaw.co.za, or you can contact us at 021-943-5111, and we would gladly assist with any property queries or estate queries that you may have.
That's great. Thank you so much. And we'll also put the contact details into the comment box below so people can easily find you. Thank you so much again. And I'm sure we're going to have you on here for another episode, because like I say, probably at the end of every episode, there is really so much to talk about. But I think you've given us a great insight today into the compliance certificates and why they're so important. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for having us.
You're welcome.